Oh boy, oh boy. If you just follow me here on YouTube, you probably know nothing about this. But if you follow me on Twitter or have a Twitter account that follows lots of people, you've probably seen this clip come across your timeline. And people are very upset with me, calling me names, saying this, that, or the other. And I just want to talk about this because the clip, I feel, was taken a bit out of context, but I don't necessarily... I'm not necessarily mad at that. That's kind of how Twitter is. You take a small clip of something and then it gets blown up because you hear what you want to hear without actually knowing what the conversation was, both leading up to that and then talking about it furthermore. So in the clip, it was on Game & Talk. It was myself, Celia, and MVG. And I mean, I did say to clip this if you wanted to clip it. So, I guess I kind of brought this on myself. Basically, I said it was slim pickings this year. If you think this was a banner year for video games, you're an effing idiot. Talking about 2024. And of course, people immediately just, jumped on me. People were sharing this tweet saying, I don't love video games anymore. I only play Nintendo games, even though my two favorite games from this year were Astrobot and Batman Arkham Shadow VR. Both games that aren't on Nintendo, so on and so forth. It's become a whole big thing. And I just want to talk about this and give a little more context to the story and kind of, what the conversation was, because I actually watched this clip back. You got to remember, I do a lot of videos. I do a lot of podcasts. So when I say things, sometimes my mind forgets what I was actually talking about with it. In that clip, when I was talking about these slim pickings, the conversation was actually, if Nintendo had a game in the Game of the Year category, what would it be? And my response to that was, it was slim pickings for first-party Nintendo games. And I completely stand by that. When you look at the output of first-party Nintendo games for 2024, it was a very conservative year. Not that there's anything wrong with that, because I think there were game highlights. But when you talk about what was the best or the two best Nintendo games for 2024 that were first-party games, most people would say Echoes of Wisdom and Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door. Now, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, to me, since that is a remake, really more of a remaster, I guess, because, there weren't core things changed about that. That's a 20-year-old game. Now, it's a classic game. It's a great game for sure, but it's not exactly pushing the medium of video games forward in 2024. It is one of those games where it's the GameCube game exists. That's what this game is. It just looks a little prettier and has some quality of life improvements. Now, if this was a brand new game, that's kind of a different topic and a kind of a different discussion, but it's not. It's a game that already existed. Echoes of Wisdom was a really good game, but I can't call it great. For me, Echoes of Wisdom, that inventory management system was not very good, and it really detracted my experience from playing that game. I think a simple inventory management system upgrade, to be able to map hotkeys to several different things that you're going to constantly use instead of having to scroll constantly through different items that you have acquired along your journey, I feel like it would have made for a better experience, a more seamless experience. It's a very good game. But as far as Zelda games are concerned, or games that have Zelda in the title, to me, this is like the DS games. They're fun in short little bursts, but you're not really going to binge these games like you would a traditional Legend of Zelda game. And then everything else for the Switch was kind of just more of the same or very conservative games. So in terms of Nintendo, it would be slim pickings as far as what game would be added into Game of the Year. But let's extend that. Let's extend that beyond Nintendo. Look at the three big companies in video games as far as first-party publishers are concerned for 2024. Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft. What did these companies do that was great this year? Sony had Astrobot. Great game that I really enjoyed. That should be in the Game of the Year conversation. But beyond that, what did they have? What did Xbox have? You could say Indiana Jones, but Indiana Jones, the game hasn't come out yet. So we don't know how that's going to be. You could say, oh, the previews of it look very good. Spoiler alert. Previews for the past 3+ years for all games have all looked very good. Doesn't that make you kind of wonder a little bit? Think about this for a second. Think about the last big budget AAA game that had a preview event. And think about if there was anything negative that came out of that. Did Redfall get a bunch of negative previews? No. Did Star Wars Outlaws get a bunch of negative previews? No. Yet, these games obviously did not hit the mark with consumers and gamers, and they weren't very good games. So when I look at Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, like, there wasn't a lot of great first-party games from them. Some good stuff, yes, but it wasn't great. And then you go into the third-party stuff. People like to bring up all of those games. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which exists because Final Fantasy VII does. Of course, you have the Elden Ring DLC, which exists because there's the base game you have to play the DLC. Silent Hill 2, a game that already existed on the PlayStation 2, and there were some good games this year. I'm not saying that there were not good games. Stellar Blade, Black Myth Wukong, Helldivers 2 was a fun game until they mucked that up with all the, nerfing of stuff and the questionable community support from these companies. But I can't help but remember all of the catastrophic failures that not only video games suffered, but the video game industry. There were huge games that completely flopped and didn't hit the mark as far as what you wanted to see from a video game. There were games like Star Wars Outlaws, which I played and I beat, and I was let down. And now they're changing up core elements of this game to remove the mandatory stealth, to make it so that if you get caught in a stealth section, now you can pew pew, bomb your way out of it. Is that the sign of a really well-crafted game? Is that the sign of a game that a company was confident about? Concord, like that kind of came and went in literally a week. The video game industry, that extending beyond just the games, was not in a good place this year. All right. Sales of things were down across the board. Companies are laying off individuals left and right. This was one of the biggest years for company layoffs, company closures. You make one game that stinks or doesn't hit, even if it's a good game, if it doesn't sell some insane metric, that studio will close down. People will lose their jobs. You have the questionable video game journalism side of things when it comes to reporting on things, making up, stories about games and game developers and why you shouldn't support this game, but then putting other games on a plateau for things that don't have anything to do with the actual quality of the game itself. There is definitely a rift with a lot of game journalists and a lot of video game players. But of course, with something like the Game Awards, to bring this all back full circle, who are the people that are nominating these games? Who are the people that are voting for these games? The same people that wrote hit piece articles about certain games that are in the conversation. I'm not saying that 2024 was the worst year ever for video games, because there was definitely highlights. If you're an RPG fan, tons of great games. Unicorn Overlord, Metaphor ReFantazio, Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance or whatever it was. There were tons of great RPGs this year. But when I look at the landscape of video games, especially on the AAA side, because there was tons of great indie games, tons of great indie games, and maybe we should start considering indie games to be right alongside of AAA games. But for whatever reason, we don't do that. There's still a stigma surrounding indie games. But if you take a look at all the games, if you even take a look at the games that are nominated for Game of the Year, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Metaphor ReFantazio, Balatro, Astrobot, Black Myth Wukong. I think there's the Elden Ring DLC. Like, out of all those games, do you see any of those games really having a lasting impact beyond 2024? Do you see somebody in 2025 still talking about one of these games and how great it is? 2026, 2027, was there anything that really pushed the genre of video games forward that was, head and shoulders above everything when it comes to excellence or doing something different or being, arguably the best game of the year? And to me, I don't think so. So, to bring this all back full circle, when I say a banner year, I'm talking about when people are going to say, oh, 2024 was like the best year ever for video games. And it wasn't to me. It definitely wasn't. Not in terms of releases, not in terms of the health of the video game industry, not in terms of all the other things that used to not be a part of the video game industry that are now a main focus of the video game industry. I think it was a decent year and there were some good games, but I don't think it was one of the greatest of all time. That's what I meant by a banner year. But of course, it's social media and people take a little tweet, a little out of context clip, and then they run with it. I still love video games. I probably play more video games than the average person does. And I did really enjoy some games this year. You know, Batman Arkham Shadow VR and Astrobot. But I don't think it was a great year for video games. I just don't. And I definitely don't think it was a banner year, as in talking about this in years to come as one of the finest years of the video game industry. And if you don't understand that, if you don't understand what I meant by saying that, maybe you weren't meant to understand it at all. Whether you love me, whether you hate me, whether you agree with me, whether you disagree with me, it's all good at the end of the day. It's all good. It's just opinions at the end of the day. But I don't think this was a banner year for video games. And if you do, I'm sorry I called you a bad name. I probably shouldn't have done that, but I did kind of mean it. Anyways, guys, let me know in the comment section down below what you think of this situation. Do you think it's gotten completely blown out of control and out of proportion? Because I sure as hell do. But hey, at the end of the day, I just laugh about these things because it's funny. It's very funny to me how, you know, this little out of context clip can cause this whole big stir on social media. I guess that means I'm somewhat important or something, even though I'm just an average guy. And as always, thank you for checking out this video. Hit subscribe if you're new. Like, comment, share. You know, put this, you know, clip something from this and put it on Twitter. You know, try to combat all these psychos coming after me because, damn, they're coming pretty hard. Pause. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.